Despite the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has severely damaged vital economic infrastructures in Ukraine, no doubt the U.S. has been supplying ammunition to Ukraine to aid them in the war. Even at that, the U.S. and Russia continue to be each other's brothers' keepers on the ISS, even though both countries are not on good terms here on Earth. Right now, the Soyuz space capsule, Soyuz MS-22, which carried one American astronaut and two Russian astronauts in space, has been damaged. How will stranded astronauts be rescued from the damaged Soyuz craft in space? And what role will SpaceX play in rescuing these astronauts? So, stick around and let us find out. The Soyuz MS-22 spacecraft, carrying Russian cosmonauts Sergei Prokofiev, Dmitry Petelin, and NASA astronaut Frank Rubio, landed at the space station in September 2022, with plans to use it to return to Earth. However, a coolant leak raised the temperature within the cabin, which could suffocate astronauts since they were dressed in spacesuit. NASA astronaut Francesco Rubio and the first two cosmonauts, Sergei Prokofiev and Dmitry Petelin, touched down on Soyuz MS-22 on September 21, 2022, following their launch from the Buccaneer Cosmodrome on December 15, 2022. A loss of pressure was triggered in the external radiator cooling loop at the same time that a visual stream of flakes was seen coming from the Soyuz MS-22 spacecraft. After many days of testing with the help of the space station's robotic arms, it was discovered that the leak was caused by a 0.8 millimeter piece of space debris that had smashed on the service module's exterior cooler radiator. This left a small hole in the gas tank. Now, here's how SpaceX will come into the scene and be the messiah to save the stranded astronauts in space. Due to the situation on the International Space Station, Russian cosmonaut Andrei Fedyaev has been pulled from SpaceX Crew 6, the upcoming trip slated to fly in mid-February. American astronaut Francesco Rubio will wear an empty SpaceX pressure suit during Crew 6. The NASA SpaceX Crew 6 and Rubio, who was also stranded on the ISS due to the Soyuz leak, will remain there for the 6-month duration of their mission before making their joint return to Earth. What effect does all of this have? Safety is the top priority in orbit. Therefore, Russia is moving the MS-23 up, and NASA's SpaceX Crew 6 is changing, which will impact the ISS's future schedule. Since the Soyuz spacecraft can only stay in orbit for 6 months while it leaks before it finally crashes, the Russian ISS schedule will need to move forward by around a month due to Soyuz MS-23's month earlier launch. Russian space engineers have determined that a Soyuz space station crew shuttlecraft that was harmed by an alleged micrometeoroid collision cannot be deployed to safely return 2 cosmonauts and a NASA astronaut to Earth as scheduled for late March. Instead, MS-23 will launch on February 20th, several weeks early and without a crew. Kudos to the US, SpaceX, and Russia, as these 3 parties continue collaborating to keep the ISS running fine amidst their differences here on Earth. We will probably extend the stay of this crew on board the station for extra several months, said Sergei Krikalev, a veteran cosmonaut and director of human spaceflight operations for Roscosmos, the Russian Federal Space Agency. The exact day to send replacements for them is not decided yet, but it is going to be a several months longer mission, he said in English during a teleconference in Moscow. Oleg Kononenko, Nikolai Chub, and NASA astronaut Laurel O'Hara, the replacement crew initially scheduled to launch aboard the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft in March, will now wait to be reassigned to a later trip. Crew 6, the next NASA-sponsored SpaceX Crew Dragon trip, is still on schedule to fly in late February as initially planned. So instead, the Crew 6 Dragon and its 4 crew members would take off a week or later. Joel Montalbano, space station program manager at the Johnson Space Station in Houston, said, "The awesome thing about our crews is they're willing to help wherever we ask. As for the unpiloted MS-23 spacecraft, we're not calling it a rescue Soyuz," he said. "Right now, the crew is safe on board the space station, and so I'm calling it a replacement Soyuz. This is the next Soyuz scheduled to fly in March," he said. "It will just fly a little earlier, so there's no immediate need for the crew to come home today. All the systems are operating." On December 14th, a coolant line was burst by a micrometeoroid impact. Prokofiev and Petelin were getting set to to leave the lab on a prearranged spacewalk when the incident happened, as television cameras on the station captured fluids of freezing coolant shooting out from the craft and into space. So, the spacewalk has to be cancelled, and the agenda on board is to rescue astronauts that are stuck. The Russians said that the spacecraft's temperatures initially stayed at acceptable levels, and all other systems looked to operate smoothly. However, engineers soon concluded that during a regular re-entry, when computers and other electronic systems would be up and running to support a voyage of 3 crew members, the crew compartment would rise to 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more, and despite the greater temperatures, the damaged Soyuz should still be able to perform an automatic uncrewed landing in Kazakhstan. However, this is not guaranteed because crew lives have to be saved first. According to the present plan, the damaged MS-22 vehicle's custom seat liners and other crew-specific equipment would be transferred to the replacement MS-23 before the former is sent back to Earth towards the mid or end of March. If we had an emergency right now, and then if you had to evacuate, which would be a very rare occurrence, you would go back to Earth in your respective vehicles, Montalbano said. But in parallel, we have been talking to SpaceX and looking at an option of what we can do with the SpaceX Crew 6 vehicle. Although the Dragon only has 4 seats and could not fit a Russian pressure suit, it could ideally bring 1 or more astronauts home in an emergency. At the same time, the Soyuz needs to accommodate more crew members physically. But bringing back a Soyuz crew member on the Dragon, even in shirt sleeve, would lessen the spacecraft's need for cooling. We decided that Soyuz is not good for nominal re-entry, Krikalev said, but in case of emergency, with extra risk, we will use the Soyuz, although together with our NASA colleagues, we are looking at several options to minimize the risk. For example, maybe move crew members, at least 1 crew member, to Dragon. However, that is a last-ditch measure, and neither NASA nor Roscosmos plans to implement any such scenario. Once the replacement MS-22 is delivered, the damaged MS-22 will return without crew members on board. Human spaceflight is gradually becoming risky because of micrometeoroids, naturally occurring rocks or metal particles that can be as small as a sand grain. These micrometeoroids, called sand grains in space, fly around the Earth at a speed of about 27,400 kilometers per hour, much faster than a bullet. According to Roscosmos, the micrometeoroid that struck the docked Soyuz was very small and only left a 1 millimeter diameter hole in the capsule. However, images from NASA TV showed snowflake-like white particles streaming out of the back, which caused very serious that put the lives of astronauts on board at risk. Spacecraft damages can equally be caused by human-made space junk. For example, in 2021, Russia blew up one of its satellites in a missile test that created clouds of zooming shrapnel. The ISS was launched in parts starting in 1998 at a time of increased US-Russia collaboration, nearly a decade after the end of the Cold War. But the space station is now looking old, and rust is visible on some parts. And it is anticipated that in 2031, the aging space station will be deorbited, with a planned descent into a discrete region of the Pacific Ocean. In the meantime, a fresh space race is escalating between the US and Russia, as Russia keeps insisting that they would depart from the space station. But first, Russia must fix a specific date to leave the space station. However, China now has big plans for space. Beijing's space program launched its first crewed space station in Earth orbit in 2021. The Heavenly Palace, named 70-ton Tiangong, is expected to be in use for at least 10 years, meaning China will aim to build their ISS in space. However, Russia is eagerly waiting until 2031 to depart from the ISS finally. If only the US can dominate space, the US government will have to fully fund NASA and SpaceX to build a fresh US ISS in space. Can this be feasible? Well, SpaceX has officially revealed a huge update on Crew Starship interior system. They seem to be almost ready to accomplish this. Just click on the video to know more about this.